Thank you, Jim. It's still with young people, although on a more somber note, a 17-year-old boy is shot and killed in a parking lot. A week later at his funeral, his 18-year-old best friend is shot and killed on the front steps of the church. It may sound like a script for a TV show like Law and Order, but it is the real-life story of the Jamestown neighborhood of Rexdale. And soon, it's going to be a play at the Fringe Festival. How the community deals with those deaths and others like it are the basis of a play called Awake. It's currently in rehearsals. And our own Robin Brown is here to tell us more. Hi, Robin.
Hi, good afternoon, Laura.
Who are these young men?
Well, the two you mentioned are Eamon Beckles and Jamal Hemmings. They were killed in 2005, and actually Eamon was the teenager shot on the church steps. A lot of people remember that from the news because it was so audacious, the idea of being shot down on a church step. Also, the story of another young man shot to death in Toronto back in 2001 is also used in this play. Justin Shepherd. Yeah. Many people know that his mom, Odette, has become very active fighting against youth gun violence in the city.
So how does this very serious matter become a play for the Fringe Festival?
Yeah, it seems like an odd leap, but it's a very interesting project, and the credit goes to Laura Mullin and Chris Tolley. They are the artistic directors of Expect Theatre, which not only produces plays, but they've also run a lot of youth programs and events for young people in the Rexdale area. So what they did was they conducted hours and hours of interviews with people in Jamestown. And from all those interviews, they put together this production called Awake. So really, there's nothing made up here. They didn't write any script. It's all real, although they have hired professional actors to portray the real people. And they've kind of given it an interesting twist because the whole play is set in a church. Oh. So at the beginning, it almost replicates the idea of being at a funeral, which certainly touches on some of these deaths. So the cast is rehearsing right now for the Fringe Festival, and earlier this week, I went to check it out.
We're going to start with Nadia, and we're going to skip over the pastor's bit on page 17.
So it'll go from Nadia to...
Eamon's best friend was killed. I believe he died in his arms. Till this day, that case is not solved. They had a wake. Eamon went, and apparently some of his friend's family didn't take that too lightly, because I guess they were determined to get him to talk. And he wouldn't talk.
I'm Beryl Bain. I'm playing Nadia and Shay. The first character, Nadia, is a woman who's describing the experience of having lost her 18-year-old son.
When you get shot, there's nothing glamorous about that stuff. We see movie stars like Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger getting shot and running 200 yards and jumping over buildings. I've seen people get shot.
My name is Moy Nene. I'll be playing the characters Dwight and Andrew.
And when they're on the floor in convulsions and losing all their bodily functions in front of you with blood coming out of them, with foam coming out of them, that's reality.
Andrew, he was in the gangs. He did sell drugs or whatever, he needed to do or he felt he needed to do at that time. But he's left that life. He's been through the system. He's been on both sides, meaning, being a perpetrator of it and being someone who's redeeming kids from that lifestyle. So he offers a path. So he's a youth worker.
My name's Chris Tolley, and I'm one of the co-writers and co-directors of Awake.
My name is Laura Mullin, and I'm also a co-writer, co-director for Awake.
I left to go to church because I wasn't thinking in my head that anything like this could happen, so...
We have two moms that lost their sons. We have a youth worker who was a former gang member. We have a police officer, a rapper. We have somebody that has had her boyfriend and many people in her life killed and is on medication for her trauma. We have a pastor who not only presides over the funeral, but he also speaks a little bit about how it affects him as a person.
When I started ministering back in Jamaica, I pastored one of the most violent areas in Kingston. Every week I would do probably 2 or 3 funerals. 90%, if not more, of these were around age 20.
Everybody knows somebody who's been killed. Everybody has multiple friends, people in their family who have been killed. And you think that this is in Toronto. This is crazy. This is so removed from my life, and I think removed from so many other people's lives, that I just had a lot of trouble wrapping my brain around that.
It's like this wound that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Every time somebody else gets killed, people have like post-traumatic stress disorder, it seems, from what we can gather, that, it's not often that young people experience their friends being killed. But in this community, it's very commonplace.
The people that we talked to, we were really lucky because a lot of them took major risks. Some of them security risks. Some of them were telling us things that, we've had to be very careful to look after their identities.
It's interesting because people would tell us that, they don't want people knowing their business. And then they would tell us stories about their moms being deported and being left at 15 to fend for themselves without much help, about being shot, about shooting people, about losing their child to gun violence. Very intimate and personal things, but things that we felt that people really wanted to have heard.
There's one line in the play, when you grow up in a war zone, you're going to grow up as a soldier. And I think that says a lot. There is personal responsibility, but when you're in a war zone, it's a completely different game, I think.
All right, you guys all ready to go?
Yeah. Look. 5, 6, 7, 8.
The show is loosely set in a funeral, and we are in a church, and it certainly reminds us of the worst case scenario, which is that people die, and that it happens all the time. But we, at the same time, I think, are also trying to celebrate the community. We're not talking just about the negativity, but we're celebrating this community because it deserves more help. It shouldn't be sort of pushed aside and forgotten about, or just read about or heard about in the headlines.
A lot of these different people, different communities, whether it's the police, whether it's youth, whether it's mom, quite often there's not a lot of communication in amongst these groups. So how we're kind of picturing this play is almost as if it was a town hall. Can you imagine if all these people got together and could actually talk to each other and tell each other their stories?
So there's music too. There's some joy in this.
Yeah, no, and it's not just, it's set in a church and it's like a funeral, but it's not just a funeral. There's dancing, there's singing, there's, like Laura said, there is the celebration of the community as well.
And what about the name Awake?
Well, interesting, because they told me that they chose it for a few different reasons, because it works on so many different levels. One, a funeral, awake for a person who has died, so in a very literal sense.
Yeah.
There's also, though, they said the wake in the water, behind a boat, the ripple effect that this violence, has beyond those directly affected. So beyond the young person who is killed, beyond the mother and the family. And so there's that kind of wake ripple. And then it's also what they hope is an awakening of the whole issue. Of family violence, or not family violence, but of gun violence among youth. And how do these young people get to that point? Because it's not just about, the guns being taken out and people being killed. But why do they feel the need to carry guns? Why are they joining the gangs? Why are they dealing drugs? What are their lives situations? And as well as their own choices, because there's personal choice involved as well. Why is it that they're at this point? And it doesn't seem to be getting better.
Who will go see this play?
Well, I think a lot of different people will go see this play. There's families. Chris was mentioning that it seems so far removed from our lives, but this is Toronto.
It is, isn't it?
It's not just Rexdale. It's not just Jamestown. These are people who, if this 18-year-old kid isn't shot, maybe he does something great for the community. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, even next week. And so we lose out. I think we as a community lose out when these things happen, whether we know these people or not. So I think it's really something for everybody to see. And they're in rehearsals now. They've got a lot of work to do in the next few weeks. And we're hoping to revisit the story also in a couple of weeks here on the program.
Okay, sounds like a very talented young cast and a really interesting way to get at such a problem in our society.
Yeah, and it's something we only hear about in the headlines. This is a different way to look at it.
Thank you for that, Robin.
You're very welcome.